Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory. And with me, as always, is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
I'm well, thank you very much for asking, Rory. We are so grateful that you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's episode 241. We just know you're going to get value from today's episode. We've got 3 stops on our journey. Our first stop is theory and practice, where we look at how theory represents itself in the actual running and practice of being a counsellor or a psychotherapist. And today we look at ethics. How do ethics show themselves within our practice, within our counselling room? We then move on to practice partner, where we have recognized that there is a need to understand more about going into private practice. It can be confusing, it can be frightening for some, and there can be some kind of dead ends along the road there. So Rory and I speak about what we might do to better our chances at doing well in private practice. And today we're going to be speaking about website development. And our sponsor of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, which is webhealer.net, Dara from webhealer.net, is going to be walking us through some best practices there. Absolutely value packed, so you're going to get a lot from that one. And then we move on to practice matters, and that's where we look at an element of practice that may present itself. It might be a presentation from a client coming in to see us. And today, Rory, you had an interview with Dr Danielle Mills on equine therapy. Now that's an interesting one, isn't it? We're talking about horses and the therapeutic nature and how that might be used therapeutically. So another really interesting topic. But to kick us off, to get us started on episode 241, Rory, ethics, but how they present in real practice.
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting one. The first time I'd ever been taught ethics was when I studied counselling. I never come across it really in my schooling. And I found it quite fascinating. And ethics is really a branch of moral philosophy. It's about right and wrong, doing things correctly and doing things incorrectly. And it's really important that as therapists and those people who train, we understand the difference between right and wrong. And some of the differences can be quite subtle. And I was thinking about this as I was preparing just to kind of read my opening monologue. And ethics really are like time, Ken. And I'll say why they like time. Because up until about the sort of the 18th century, everybody in the country, certainly in the UK, had their own time. No one had a watch or a clock. So it meant that everybody had their own version of what time was. It was only when the trains started to run that clocks were invented. A bit of a fun fact there, so the trains could run on time. And the same thing really applies to ethics, because if we don't have an agreed way of working, an agreed right and wrong, we could become tribal and we might just make our own rules up, which means that clients may become disadvantaged. So ethics is a universal agreement of what is right and wrong. And it's so important that we understand how ethics fit into our studying and indeed our practice, for those who are going into practice. And it's really about how you present yourself in the therapy room and what guides your actions. If you have to make an action, what guides your actions? Where do you go to say, I've had this presented to me, what do I do next? And the answer is check your ethical framework.
Oh, I like that. What a great way to set that stage, Rory, and kind of lay it out there, looking at where ethics kind of originate, the seed of ethics being in that moral philosophy. And I think what's important here, we're speaking about ethics in counseling specifically. We're speaking about ethics that, as Rory has just mentioned, you may see from your ethical body. You know, as a counselor, as a psychotherapist, when you graduate, you will join an ethical body, and there will be a code of ethics or an ethical framework to which we will work. And I guess it differs from profession to profession. So in a previous profession, Rory, I was a full-time magician. That's what I did. I was an entertainer. I used magic and illusion as my vehicle for entertainment. And we had a magic club. It's called the Magic Circle. I was a member of the Johannesburg Magic Circle at the time. And one of our ethics was that we would not reveal the secrets of magic because it protects magic and magicians as a whole. Now, of course, that ethic, which I hold very dearly and do to this day, doesn't show itself in counseling. So it is counseling specific when we're speaking about ethics here, not just ethics in general. I'm using as a reference for today National Counselling Society, which is a ethical body here in the United Kingdom. I'm using their ethical framework. There are other ethical frameworks available, and you would look to whoever your ethical body is. And what I like from this is it starts off by kind of defining an introduction of what ethics are, and it says ethical considerations are more than pluralistic judgments of right and wrong. I like that. That's a lovely sentence. They involve exploring principles, morals, and values behind a particular intent, intervention, and action. And I think that's a beautiful way of describing why the ethics are there. And of course, I think to go into how ethics may present themselves, I think we start why we have a code of ethics. And the code sets out standard expectations for all counselors, or at least if you're a member of an ethical body and you're working to that framework, you're agreeing to that when you become a member. You are putting your signature, you are professing that you will follow this ethical framework. And I guess, Rory, that's the basis of the word professional, comes from professing an oath. And here we're professing to uphold an ethical framework. And that's why counseling is a profession. We profess this allegiance or this following of these ethics. And if we kind of know what those ethics are, it stops my judgment or my frame of reference maybe differing from yours, Rory, and you thinking one thing is right in a situation and me going, no, something else is right. So it gives us something that is a standard, something we can look to. If we come into difficulty, we can look to that ethical framework to help us in our decision making. And I think the number one takeaway from ethics is it will look at your fitness to practice. Your fitness, your ability to be able to serve a certain client. And I guess it is unethical, and it makes sense that it would be unethical to work with a client in an area that we're not trained in, Rory. And I think in its simplest terms, ethics can guide us in, is this client right for me, or is this client not right for me? And I guess that's a very basic one, but that is a very strong foundation of what the ethical framework is there for.
Absolutely. And ethical frameworks are there, to protect clients. We speak a lot on the Counselling Tutor Podcast about the trainee or the practitioner's frame of reference. But from a client's frame of reference, someone who knows nothing about counselling but needs that help, maybe desperate for help to try and kind of find the answers to difficulties in their life. When they sit in front of someone, I think there's an expectation that person is going to do the right thing. He's going to act in a way that advantages the client and helps the client, not disadvantages the client. And ethics are part of that. It's part of making the client's journey as pain-free as possible, but also, and I think this is really, really important, the fact that it gives credibility to our profession, the fact that when someone visits a counsellor, they're not going to go away and say, oh my goodness, that was a terrible experience, and I'm not going back there again. They asked me for money, or they asked me for a date, or something like that. That when they sit in front of someone, they're confident that person is going to treat them correctly, is going to be very thoughtful, and crucially, Ken, is accountable. Is accountable because the reason we have a code of ethics, it's something we sign up to. You're absolutely right, Ken. We profess that we will work in a certain way, hence the word professional. You're absolutely correct. But what happens if a client says, actually, that person didn't treat me correctly? They formulate a complaint, initially maybe to the organization, or if it's a private practitioner, to the ethical board that they are that the practitioner belongs to. And the first thing the organization or the ethical body is going to say is, how did you use the code of ethics to shape your decision? And if you say, oh, well, I read it once, but I don't take too much notice of it, you're going to be in some difficulty. You're going to be in some difficulty. An ethical framework gives us the advantage, and it is an advantage, of being able to make decisions based on an external opinion. And we can therefore formulate any responses or look at our actions through that prism. Very, very important. And I want to say one thing about the ethical frameworks. For those of you who are studying, you may have come across the different ethical bodies. That there's no one ethical body here in the UK. There's a number of ethical bodies, and they all sit under the Professional Standards Authority, which is a government organisation which sets the kind of, I'm going to use a very simple word, the rules of how professionals engage. And most of the ethical frameworks actually are the same. They say the same thing in different words. It's the same thing in different words. So there's a huge expectation of, this is how therapists behave, and this is the ethical framework that you look to. And as I said earlier on, if you find yourself, in front of a complaint, you will have to use the ethical framework to mitigate or to justify what you've done.
Yeah. Ethical decision making. And going to your ethical framework when you're needing to make a decision and looking at what the requirements are, the fundamental principles of that framework, and mapping what your decision is to that protects you. And it's called ethical decision making. Now, that ethical framework protects you as a practitioner. So when you're making decisions within that framework and you're kind of following the framework as a guiding light, as it were, then you are kind of protecting the decisions you make. Doesn't mean that the decisions will always be right, but you can defend why you made that decision. But it also protects the client, because you are informing a client when they kind of present for therapy that there is a complaints procedure. And if you're not, we should be. This is something that if you are a member of an ethical body and you're working to an ethical framework that has a transparent complaints procedure, which all ethical bodies certainly here in the UK do have, we need to be giving that information over to our clients, because we're probably the last person that a client will go to if they are unhappy or if they do have a complaint. They're more likely to tell their friends and wanting some kind of recourse for that. So we give that to them right in the beginning, and it's really good practice to make available of the ethical framework to which you practice available for your client. That can be done in an email where you give them a link to a PDF version from your ethical body, or you can print it out and give it to them in your very first session. But that kind of levels the playing field. We're saying the ethical framework is there to protect us, also there to protect the clients. So to balance, I guess, the power of counselling, the client should have access to the same information we have access to in terms of the ethical framework and guidance on how they should go about if they do feel that they want to raise a complaint against us. So I think that is really, really important when we're looking at how ethics might present in practice. Step one, make sure that you're informing your client to which ethical framework you work, making a copy of that available and a link if they want to go and have a look at that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Ken. And one of the things that may be in short supply for clients is trust. One of the things that can sometimes happen as people go through their lives is they may become mistrusting events, and people in their lives may have given them cause to mistrust. So when they go to see a counsellor, there could be very strong issues of trust. And Ken outlining what is really good practice to give a client on the contracting stage, the very first session that you see them formally, to give them a copy of the ethical framework and link that to a complaints procedure has, to some level, I would imagine, build trust, because trust is the currency of therapy, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
If you don't trust someone, you ain't going to tell them what's on your worried mind. And if you can do that right from the outset, they say that first impressions are lasting impressions, and I think that's a pretty good axiom to live by. If if you're producing this and saying, look, this is how you can, if you've got a complaint, you can complain here. This is the ethical framework, making it all transparent, then that will really, really go a long way to building trust and, most importantly, building the relationship, which, as we know, is a huge part. A good therapeutic relationship with a client is a huge part to the curative factors of people getting a positive outcome in therapy.
I like that, Rory. And the truth of the matter is, when we're speaking now about how theory applies itself in practice, and we're speaking about those ethical frameworks. Well, how does this appear in our practice? The truth is, when you are in a session with a client, whether that be online or in person in a room, there are three elements to that relationship. There is you and the client. That is one element of that relationship. Also, with you in the room, in a way, is your insurer. They're there because we have to work to the requirements of our insurer. And if there is a complaint, or if something does go wrong, of course, our insurer is the one that steps in and protects us, our reputation, and us financially as well. But also in the room is our ethical body that we kind of subscribe to, because we are acting from, acting in a way we should in terms of working within the ethical framework. So in the room is us and our client, our insurer, and our ethical body. And if you look to your ethical body, they will give you things that you can strive to be, ways of being that we should strive to be, and that's kind of personal qualities. But they will also have definites, and those definites will be, you have to do this. And that would be maybe related to the law within where your jurisdiction or wherever it is you practice. So right here in the UK, part of the National Counselling Society ethical framework is maintain strict confidentiality with the client-counsellor relationship, and it speaks about collection of information online, records kept secure and confidential that are on a computer, following the terms of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. So that is very specific to the United Kingdom and to Europe, I guess, Rory. But we're not given a choice here. We're told we have to ensure that the client notes and record are kept secure and confidential, and that we register with the ICO where applicable if we are storing information online. So you'll get from your ethical framework personal qualities to work towards, and a way of being that we would hope to, that would represent, that would be considered a good practice for counsellors. But there are also parts of the ethical framework which are hard, fast, you will do this, because they're related to the law. One of those, of course, is the breaking of confidentiality. We hold confidentiality as a cornerstone, but if we're taking theory, putting it into practice, there are certain things that if a client mentions them, you have to break confidentiality, certainly here in the UK, because the law requires us to.
Absolutely. And I like the term framework. When I was younger, which was a long time ago, we used to have something in our local park called monkey bars, which was a frame made of scaffolding poles, which would be about 7 foot high, and then internally it had scaffolding poles that made a lot of cubes inside, and the children would play inside it. And it was noticeable that the children who played inside it, if they slipped, they'd only fall to the next level, and they could hold on to that and they'd be fine. But the children who played on the outside, if they fell from 7 foot, and by gosh, they fell hard. And I think if you want to visualize the framework, it's something you work within. And the nice thing about frameworks is that they should hold you. If you do slip, they should hold you. And the framework is plugged in for those who practice to supervision. So supervisors should be talking about the ethical framework.
Oh, yeah.
So it produces a check and a balance. And, people make mistakes. This isn't about being punitive, but sometimes we do things with the best intentions, and we find that we're on the outside of the framework. We could fall, and with that falling, we may take our client with us. So it's really important that, we talk about ethics all the time. It should be in our conversations as students, as practitioners within supervision. It should be like a stick of rock. Click the stick of rock open, it should say ethics all the way through. If you had a Blackpool stick of rock, a counselling stick of rock, if you clicked it open, it would say ethics in the middle.
Yeah. Oh, very much so. If you're outside of the UK and wondering what a stick of rock is, jump on Google and put in Blackpool stick of rock, and basically it's a sweet. It looks like a stick. It's kind of maybe an inch in diameter, and throughout the whole of the stick is wording, and it will say something like Blackpool or the tourist destination, and we call it a stick of rock here in the UK, and it's basically the same wording is present throughout the entirety of that suite as the wording of the ethical framework should be present within our practice. If there's a takeaway as we kind of back out of this, it is this. How do we take this theory, put it into practice? Well, you go to your ethical body and download the ethical framework and look at it again. Print it out, have it on your desk, have it wherever it is that you can look at it on a regular basis, and familiarize yourself with it. Yes, we're called on to study this when we become when we're students and we're training to become counselors, but it's good practice to reflect on it regularly, and a good supervisor will hold you to account, as Rory has just said, and you should be looking at that at the bare minimum a couple of times a year in your practice. Things do change in the ethical frameworks, and also we change as practitioners. There's the general conduct, but there's also ethics that pertain to certain elements of practice, like if you're doing research, and you might not think of that. You might have a research project on and just go ahead with that in your own private practice. You might be researching something you want to write about. Go and look at the research ethics from your body first. Training ethics, if you decide, what, I've got a specialist area in such and such, and I trained to be a teacher, so I'm going to offer some training. I'm going to do some CPD. Well, your ethical body should have a section within the ethical framework that covers how we conduct ourselves when we're delivering training. And maybe it doesn't come to mind naturally. And this is why having the framework on hand and looking at it regularly kind of prompts us to what we should be doing and the different areas that we can map to that framework within our practice.
Absolutely. And if you want something on hand to have a look at, I've made a handout on the role of ethics and ethical bodies. And to get that handout, if you go to our mother website, counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, find episode 241. That handout is waiting for you.
Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. And as we back out of our practice, applying ethics in our practice, we're now looking at practice partner Rory. This is a special one. This is an interview with Dara McLaughlin from webhealer.net on website development, all things websites.
Absolutely. And if there's a question that gets asked again and again in our Facebook group, it is, should I have a website? What do I have to put on a website? How do I use a website? do any different pages on the website. And if you want to join our Facebook group, if you go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, we'll let you in. We're a closed group, but we'll let you in, and you can join the thousands and thousands of people who are in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And I met up with Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer, and he gave a cracking interview and shared some of the secrets, in fact, all of the secrets on building a successful website. And this is what he had to say. And we welcome Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer, who has joined us as an expert today to answer the many questions posed by therapists who wish to have a web presence. So welcome, Dara.
Hello, Rory. Nice to be with you today.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I know that there are lots of questions that you get asked as a website development organisation, specifically from therapists, and we've taken a selection of those questions. And hopefully, those people listening, it'll be questions that they'll probably be asking. So the first question is what's the difference between someone building their own website and actually having one professionally made?
Well, that's a great question, Rory. And it's a question that you probably couldn't have asked me a number of years ago, because the prevalence of DIY builders is much more than it was once upon a time. So it's a real option now to give it a go yourself and try and get out there and build your own website. When it comes to the difference, I suppose, between the two options, we see three main points, I think, to consider. Probably the first thing is the quality of what is being built. So, we need to remember you're a counselor, you've trained as a counselor, and you've trained very hard at that. But when it comes to actually putting together a website on your own, even though you do have the tools from these DIY website builders to do so, is the quality of what you produce going to accurately reflect your practice? Is it going to be your best foot forward, so to speak? So obviously, compared to somebody who's doing this day in, day out, you're just not going to be up to the same level, so to speak. Now, that doesn't mean you can't create an aesthetically pleasing website. But when I talk about the quality of website, not only do I talk about maybe how it looks, but I also talk about maybe adherence to best practice when it comes to preparing your website to rank on the search engines. The behind the scenes, slightly technical element of building a website that can often be forgotten when you're looking at a lovely, shiny drag and drop tool, which, on the face of it looks very appealing and cost effective to build a website. So that'll be probably one of the first things. The second thing, of course, is the cost. So you have to consider yourself versus a designer. If a designer is going to take 10 or 15 hours to build a website for you, how long is it going to take you as a counselor, someone who doesn't have that formal training or, week in, week out experience? So, if you put a value on your time, could you be making better use of that time? Could you be doing some CPD work? Could you be just having some good old fashioned R&R after a busy week with clients? So these are things I think that it's easy to forget. But at the end of the process, if you were to look back, would you regret maybe investing that time when your money, frankly, would be spent better elsewhere? And probably the last thing we would consider when looking at a DIY versus a professionally built website would be the time to actually get yourself online. So, you're very busy with the day job, seeing clients, supervision, CPD, etc. How long can you dedicate every day, every week to actually building this website? Is it going to be a project that's going to get strung out over several months? Are you going to miss the boat? What's the opportunity cost of that? So if you want to get the website done and you made a conscious decision, now's the time to get this squared away, maybe it's better to talk to somebody who can give you a definite and a finite timeline for achieving that. Because sometimes the website might just go on the long finger. It's a nice to have, you might say, but if you don't have the hours in the day, how can you get it done in a timely fashion? So really worth considering.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a couple of things that comes from that. One is that, the drag and drop websites may look quite easy to do, but you have to commit time to that. And as you say, people are busy in practice, developing the practice, seeing clients, supervision, CPD, looking after themselves. And I guess the other thing is that if you work with a professional, you'll get a timeline of development. You'll have an inset time where you'll say, yes, I want one building, and then you'll have a delivery time. And all you do is you contribute to that timeline,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if someone's thinking of going down the professional route, there's a plethora of providers out there that, a cursory internet search would see hundreds of people who can make your website and promise you the earth. What sort of a provider should a therapist be looking for, Dara?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it would be very easy for me to turn around and say, well, the first thing you need to ask is the price. Every price you're going to get is going to be different. And unfortunately, there's going to be huge variance between the various different prices you get. So, you need to feel comfortable with the price that designer is going to charge you. So even approaching them with a very basic overview of what you'd like to achieve, you should be able to get some idea of where the price will land. Obviously, if you want to do multiple revisions to the website and you want to add to it on an ongoing basis, there's scope for that price to increase. But I think it's really important to understand very early on where that price is going to land. The other thing I touched on in the previous point, I suppose, is the timeframes. You want a designer who's committed to actually building your website, and that doesn't try and squeeze it in between, some other work that they may be doing. Unfortunately, in the industry of web design, you have a lot of people who maybe do this as a hobby or as a side hustle or a side job, so to speak. And so what you don't want to do is find that you're put at the bottom of the pile when it comes to actually getting jobs done. So a realistic time frame, really, really, really important. We often get calls from people who've had experience with a designer. Unfortunately, they've gone AWOL. They've maybe changed career. And again, as I said, such is the nature of the career or, the relationship maybe with the designer. Maybe they're a friend's son in college or daughter in college, etc. Sometimes they mightn't be available after a period of time to make ongoing changes to your website or support you with a question that you might have. So it's very important to understand what the after-sales service is going to be like. And do you have the ability to maybe access that website after it's built? Or what happens if they're no longer interested? I think it's very important to pose that question. And when you're dealing with some companies, it's clear, they're in the web design business and they're there to stay. But I think it's a very valid question to ask if perhaps somebody is just starting out or if it's a friend's friend, etc. Really important. Probably the last thing I would say there, Rory, is it's really important that this web design firm has an appreciation of your skill set and an understanding of where you are at on the technical ladder. There's no point in trying to work, and I say trying to work with somebody who speaks to you in a language that just doesn't gel. So it's really important that they understand where you're at. They can cater, the conversations, even the back end of the system. So if you want to be able to go in there and make an edit or a modification, it's important that they've created that in a way that's easy to use and that's not frustrating. Because after all that work, do you want to be frustrated when you're trying to maintain your website? No, I don't think so.
Yes, and I think that's really important. You can take ownership of a nice shiny new website. Something goes wrong, and there's no one there to help you or support you. What are you going to do? And of course, the internet does change some of the things that certainly search engines asks of websites. And I know this from Counselling Tutor, asks us to make changes to the website to rank higher on the searches. And unless I guess you've got support in doing that, you could find yourself in difficulties. Which brings myself to the next question. How would you get to the top of search engines?
The $1 million question, Rory.
It is a $1 million question.
Absolutely. Well, listen, at the end of the day, Google is a service. And, quite a lot of us in the UK use this service because Google provides good results. So, if you went to Google and you were looking for a nice holiday in the sun and you got a snow holiday, well, you'd say, well, this search engine is no use. I'm not going to use it any longer. So it's in Google's interests all the way through to return results or websites to us that are really going to satisfy our queries. So when you're building your website, you need to think about who's going to land on your website and what information are they looking for. And then you need to make sure that you align the website content to those queries and those questions. So what I mean by that is you need to have a very clear purpose with your website. So every page, every paragraph, every heading, there must be a purpose and it must be clear. For example, if you were to go to a health insurance website and the headline on the website was doing everything we can for your family, that doesn't really a clear purpose. However, if the paragraph heading was cheap health insurance for you and your family, well, then that's very much a clear purpose. So purpose is incredibly clear. And so everything you do must be focused on that purpose. When it comes to ranking high, Google has quality guidelines, and they look for certain things on a website. And specifically when it comes to counselors and psychotherapists, they're looking for something called EAT, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. So on that website, you need to exhibit those three characteristics. And when you achieve that, and when you do that very well, Google is more likely to push you up the search results, because at the end of the day, for a subject which is as sensitive and as important as counseling and seeking professional assistance, it's very important that the information you're given is true and correct. And so Google will look for signals, as they call them, on your website that you're an expert, you're an authority on what you're talking about, and indeed you're trustworthy. Because at the end of the day, this is a very personal relationship that you're establishing with the client, and it's important that you're trustworthy.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, I think a lot of people forget that element, that Google is returning searches for authority. They're looking for websites that have authority, where the websites themselves, the information on the websites is accurate, it's up to date. And you're absolutely right. Google selects that. So by having authority, and I guess by having a web designer who can support you in looking at that authority, that's going to be of great help, isn't it?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's important to say that there are other nuances to appearing on the top of the search results. This whole area, of course, is called SEO. Some of your listeners might be familiar with it, or search engine optimization, the process to optimize your website to appear higher up the rankings. So EAT is very important, as I mentioned, but there are some other slightly more technical nuances to SEO that are very important. And typically, your web designer will be familiar with these. So in constructing the website, they'll put them together in a manner which ticks the boxes. And what I'm referring to there is things like page speed, the structure of your website, the proper use of headings, the sizes of headings, things like that. Incredibly important. But, as somebody who doesn't do this full-time or regularly, it's very easy to miss those things, which are really important, and build part of the bigger picture when it comes to ranking your website and Google deciding where you need to be.
Yes, and to that end, are blogs helpful on websites?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, going back to this concept of EAT, the ability to demonstrate your expertise and your authority on a subject matter. So it may be couples counseling, it may be, person-centered approach, anything like that. It's a platform for you to demonstrate how capable you are. Consider that when somebody wants to engage the services of a counselor, they'll browse around, they'll perform several Google queries, they'll land on websites, and they will read the website. At the end of the day, they want to make sure that this person who they're going to make an investment in time and money to go and see is the right person to help them. And sometimes, when you're designing your website, although it's important to have plenty of content on it, it has to be structured in a way that it's not literally a wall of text someone has to digest before they get to your contact details. So blog is great to say, listen, I'll give you the headlines if you want on my website pages. But if you want to really find out how I would approach a particular situation, maybe read this article on my blog. And you'll often find that blogs will be the entry point from the search engines. So somebody may be looking for assistance with couples counseling in Brighton, for example, and you may have a blog post specifically written about this particular subject. And so that might be the landing page that Google brings the client to, and from there, they'll hop onto your website. So a blog is incredibly important to have for the purposes of this EAT concept, but also it shows and it provides a platform really for people to land on before jumping into the main body of your website to make contact with you.
Yes, and I think that you bring up a very interesting point there. A lot of clients may search for something, specific, like looking for a counsellor, say in Brighton, or looking for a counsellor in Manchester who specialises in depression. If you have those keywords in there, in that blog, it's more likely that you'll be found, and you can start that conversation with your client. They can see a little bit about your practice. They can see a little bit about how you how you operate, and that can build trust, and with trust builds, maybe for some clients who are a little bit nervous or unsure who to go to, they can see who you are, you get a better aspect of who you are, and then they can contact you through the main body of the website, and hopefully you'll meet up with that client and be of service. We live in an age of data. This is all about data, websites and how we engage with the internet. What are the responsibilities in terms of having a website with regard to things like cookies and general data protection regulations?
Yes. Well, thankfully, when it comes to a website for a counsellor and a private practice, the amount of information that you need to collect through that website is generally minimal enough. So when it comes to your responsibilities around cookies, you're obligated to tell your website visitors that I am using cookies on my website. Now, what are cookies? Cookies are a little piece of information that are little files indeed that your website will place on a visitor's computer. This helps track, for example, their activity around the website. So if you want to see how many visitors you're getting to your website, you would use cookies for this. Or if you had, for example, a private area on your website where you shared reading material for your clients, you would need to operate cookies in order to log them in. And so when you give notice about using cookies, for example, you're telling the visitor what cookies I'm using and for what purpose they are. So there is talk perhaps in the UK about these cookie notices, which, as useful as they are, they're also quite annoying. I think when you're searching websites, they can be quite frustrating because there's no standard format. Sometimes they appear in the bottom of the page, sometimes they appear in the top of the page. And, one must think about user experience when somebody is on the website too. If somebody is frustrated on your website as soon as they land on it, getting cookie notices and GDPR and get added to my newsletter on how to, do X, Y, and Z, it's a very frustrating experience. So your cookie notice is required, but it should fit on your website in such a way that doesn't impede the user from actually browsing the website before they make that investment to say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge the cookie notice and I'm going to read further. But the cookie notice, as I said, it must tell the users what cookies you're using on the website for what purpose. In some cases, cookies that are used on the website are optional. So in some cases, they're not. So if you do operate a private area for your clients to download material, for example, those cookies wouldn't be seen to be optional because without them, you can't operate the website and the website function. When it comes to GDPR, of course, GDPR is a very large subject. You must accurately and carefully think about the information that you are storing on your clients when they visit your website. A lot of counselors will have a separate GDPR and privacy statement, maybe as part of their therapy contract. So when it comes to your website, my feeling typically is with counseling websites that the amount of data that you collect is actually quite minimal. There's no incredibly sensitive information that you're collecting. You're collecting benign piece of information, for example, an IP address, so you can see the location of where this visitor has come from, which would play into, say, looking over your website statistics. So it's important to think about what you are collecting, if anything, on your website and why you're collecting it. And obviously to demonstrate the rights that the visitor has in, knowing about that information, opting out, having the information removed, and so on. Typically, we refer our clients to their professional associations to get a sense and awareness around the personally identifiable information that they do collect. But I'm happy to say on a website, it's not too onerous. And most website designers should be able to steer you in the right direction. However, it's prudent to get this looked over by somebody perhaps who's more familiar and up to date in the same way that you would with your website. You can do it yourself, of course, but there's nothing better than a professional looking over it.
Yes, absolutely. And GDPR and data protection are something that we, as therapists, and indeed anybody who has a web presence, needs to be very thoughtful about. And I like your view that, speak to your professional body, because they will be asked this question quite regularly, and they will have hopefully a ready-made response. Now, a lot of people listening to this, hearing all these terms that you use, Dara, may think, oh my goodness, this is very, very technical. Do you need to be technically minded to run a website?
I mean, at face value, you don't. We spoke earlier about the concept of a drag and drop site builder and how you can put together a website, relatively easily, relatively cost effectively. And it will look, it would look okay. When it comes to making sure that that website really works hard for you, because let's be honest here, your website is a tool to attract new clients to you. It's not a CV. It's not a vanity project. It is a tool in your arsenal to attract more clients. And if you want to get the most out of that tool, having some technical knowledge definitely isn't going to go astray. And what I mean by that is it's the curiosity to perhaps read up on the latest trends when it comes to search engines. Or it's, I suppose, yes, the curiosity to read up on the latest trends when it comes to search engines, because that is really the most important part of having a website, is bringing people to it. Obviously, over the years, we have a lot more devices on the scene. So, people will access their website on a tablet, on a phone, on all sorts of devices. And so being able to keep abreast of these types of changes are also really important too. So I think whether you're technically minded or not, it's the difference between having a website and having a website that's working really well for you. There's no doubt about it. And that's where it's nice to be able to lean on a professional who takes up the reins when it comes to the technicalities and insulates you from that.
Yes. I mean, I think that's really important. It's about, sticking to what you're good at. A therapist skills lie in therapy. There may very well be therapists who are very technically minded, but having someone who is skilled, understands the development of websites, understands how they operate, sounds, from what you've said so far, increasingly important. So if someone decides to have a website built, is there a process that website builders go through?
Well, I would certainly, when you're interviewing your chosen web designer, this would be probably one of the first questions that I would ask. It's very important to understand if they have a thought out process. That will instill confidence, I think, in the overall likelihood that your website will be completed, because it can be the case that websites are often started but not completed because, for many different reasons. So talking about the process, we would always recommend that there's some sort of a discovery process, an exchange of the basics of information, who you are, your location, benign phone number, postcode, etc. From there, you would drift into things like specifying your color schemes, or maybe some websites that you've seen that you like. Maybe there's some colleagues' websites on the internet that are performing well, or that you simply like the look of. A web designer then should take all that information and they should start to create a first draft for you of a website. That first draft is a manifestation of that information that you've put together. And then they should be available to bounce that back and forth at you, because it's very rare that they're going to get it right first time. You may have second thoughts on something. You may wish to add something else that you've seen into the website. And so having the ability to go through several rounds of revisions with your designer is incredibly important. At the end of the day, it's only when you go through that process do you know that you're going to be truly happy with the end product. So that would typically be the handshake, if you want, at the very start of the process. Now, when the website is done, you obviously need to select your domain name. And you can, if you have a domain name purchased already, most web designers can work with that. Or indeed, as you go through the process, you can consider it and be checking its availability, because, domain names, they're always in ever shortening supply. So it's important to make sure that your domain name is available. Once you've got your domain name registered and the website design agreed with the designer, then it's just a process of putting it live and starting to focus and consider getting listed on the search engines.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a definite discovery, sample, and color scheme. There's a definite process of working and collaborating with a website designer.
Collaborating is very important, Rory. I think at the end of the day, you want somebody to be in your corner. It's important that you have that rapport with your designer, that they know who your ideal audience is. And so after you've put the phone down from them and they're burning the midnight candle, that they will be creating a website which accurately represents your practice. And I suppose, is designed in such a way to be as appealing as possible to the type of people whom you wish to work with.
Absolutely. And in terms of a website sections, the different pages on the website, what sections are most important to include?
Well, I'm a big fan personally of a picture on a website. And this day and age, it's very easy to scroll through a website, land on a website, and 5 seconds later be on a different website. With counseling, it's a very personal relationship. And your website without a picture is really like a blank piece of paper. You need to draw people in to you. You need to put down the beginnings of a very strong rapport that you're going to end up building with that client. So I think a headshot or a picture of you is a great start, incredibly important. Coming back to this concept of expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, other things that are very important are things like information about you, frankly, where you qualified, when you qualified, how many hours you've done, maybe what CPD you've done this year, what qualifications you might have outside of your main qualification. People need to become familiar with you and be happy with you, that they feel they could work with you. But also from Google's point of view, they want to see how authoritative you are in the subject of counseling. And the more qualifications you can list there, incredibly important. Other elements of the website that are important is talking about your affiliations to professional associations or any maybe charities that you work with. Again, that's a big plus for your trustworthiness. Speaking to clients you want to work with is naturally important. So if you specialize, for example, in play therapy for children or couples counseling for couples, incredibly important that you dedicate a section of the website to those specialities and talk in depth about the journey that people go on when they engage your services for that. So talking about couples counseling, well, I think anybody off the street may understand what couples counseling is, but what it entails and how a typical session goes, these are important things to put on your website because you want to paint that picture in the visitor's head about how the client-therapist relationship is going to flow. And when they feel at ease with that, they're more likely to make that call to action, which is to send you an email, to pick up the phone, or indeed book online should you offer that service. So establishing rapport, incredibly important. Establishing yourself as an authority and showing your expertise and trustworthiness, also really important. And then speaking directly to your target audience.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And those are all the kind of things that you would probably only find out if you work with someone who's a website developer. It would take you ages to find that information out and to be able to develop it in a way that the search engines picked up on if you had to do it on your own. So if someone decides to go down the route of building a website, should they have access to make modifications if something goes wrong?
Well, if something goes wrong, but not only that, the website is incredibly important to keep it fresh and keep it active. You know, if you walk down the high street and you see a clothes shop, it's very rare that the same clothes are on the same mannequins all year round. And at the end of the day, a website is your shop front. It's your public facing, I suppose, shop front to entice people to work with you. So it's important to keep that website moving and changing all the time. So editorial access is going to be very important if you are comfortable with the concept of keeping the website up to date. You should also speak to the designer if you do go down the route of approaching a designer, so that in building the website, they build it in such a way that it aligns with your technical ability. So sometimes you can have an administrative area of a website which will allow you to maintain it and keep it up to date, but it's very clunky, technically heavyweight, and frankly would dissuade you from maintaining the website. So it's really important to make sure that, it's easy to use. What happens if something goes wrong? Well, I think that comes back to your choice in provider. Is it a case that you're using perhaps, a faceless, massive multinational whom you can't actually call and say, listen, I need to dig out here. I've made a mistake, or I really need to make this change. I know it's only small, but I'm at sea. I don't know what I'm at. Or, are you going to literally face the fact that if you lose some content or you don't know, you're on your own? You don't want to be in that position. So having access and after sales service is incredibly important when it comes to this. But the interest and the ability to have editorial access and to keep the website moving is incredibly important from a search results point of view, but also for your visitors too. If they know that you're keeping your website up to date and there's some recent timestamps on maybe a blog or blog post, or there's an article about a conference that you went to and some CPD, that instills a lot of confidence in that website visitor, and they're more likely to pick up the phone and ring you as a result.
I like what you say about the website being a shop front, because that's exactly what it is. People will be looking at your service, looking at your offer, and if it's fresh, if it's up to date, if there's lots of information, shows you professional formation, therefore more likely that people will build a relationship initially with what they see on the website, and then they will call you and connect with you and hopefully become your client. So finally, and I think one of the things that people spend a lot of time kind of chewing over, if you like, is the domain name. How do you choose a domain name? Should you include your own name or keywords or both? What's the formula for that, Dara?
Well, great question. I suppose, first of all, to clarify for the listeners, a domain name is a technical term for your website address. It's your web address. So when it comes to choosing your web address, there used to be an obsession about making sure that your keywords, the keywords that you wanted to target, were in that domain name. Not incredibly important. That's it. That's only an aesthetical matter, really. So when you're choosing your domain name, you choose it, most likely to reflect you as a person. As again, this is a very personal relationship. We tend to recommend people avoid putting a location in their domain name, because life happens. Sometimes we change cities, we change towns, and that can have a knock-on effect. If you're Jane Doe Counselling in Brighton suddenly has to become Jane Doe Counselling in Cornwall. They're two different things, and so there's implications of changing your domain name. So pick a domain name which isn't likely to change. So most likely your name. If you're going for your name, it's less likely that there's going to be others who have already taken that. Maybe if you feel compelled to add the word counselling at the end of it, or something that's specific to your practice. If you're a practice or a grouping of multiple therapists, no harm putting your brand name in there, certainly. But a domain name is a vanity, really. It's not incredibly important from a search point of view, as long as you're comfortable with it. And when people see it, they know that this is the person I'm looking for. If they've had a recommendation from a friend or a GP or something like that, that Jane Doe is the person you need to speak to, and they search and all they find is, maybe Shamrock Counselling, perhaps you should be focusing on what people are going to recognize you as. So go in there with your name, append maybe a keyword to the end of it, but don't worry about it too much. Pick something that's short and sweet and reflects you.
Yes, and I think you make a really good point, certainly in the world of online and telephone therapy, where a lot of people now are working, across the country. Then having a website that doesn't tie you to one geographical area is probably quite a good idea. And as you say, people move around. This has been a fascinating insight into web development, Dara. I've certainly learned so much, and I think it's really useful to understand, and you've done that brilliantly, the difference between going your own way, making your own website, maybe starting it, maybe finishing it, maybe not, and having a developed website, working with another professional like you are, to develop and to show your expertise. So Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer, thank you so much for joining us.
Great big thank you to Dara, so packed with information. And it's just kind of echoed that webhealer.net, they are a sponsor of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And just by listening to the podcast, being a podcast listener, you are entitled to £100 off their do-it-for-you build of a website. And if you want more information on that, go to counsellingtutor.com website, and you can get all the information on the packages that they offer. Keep in mind, WebHealer only build websites for counselors and psychotherapists, so they know what it is that we do. They do the heavy lifting. They take all the technical work off our hands, and they basically leave us to do what we do well, which is focus on our clients. So if you're interested in finding out more about the packages from webhealer.net, go to counselingtutor.com/website, because that's where you will get £100 off, and you can see the service that they offer there. So now on to Practice Matters, Rory, where you met up with Dr. Danielle Mills to speak about equine therapy, the use of horses.
I know. Our profession is such a broad church. When I started 20 years ago, someone said there was about 500 different therapies, and I'm sure that must have gone up by a factor of at least 10 in the last 2 decades. And one of the very interesting areas of therapy is equine therapy. So I caught up with Dr. Danielle Mills, who's an equine therapist, and we had a conversation about horses and therapy. And this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
And we're joined today by Dr. Danielle Mills, who's very, very kindly joined us, and he's going to talk about a part of counselling practice that is really, really interesting, and that is equine therapy. So, Dr. Danielle Mills, first of all, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, I guess the first question is, what is equine therapy?
Oh, yeah, excellent question. So, equine therapy is essentially working alongside a horse or horses as part of a treatment team. So often equine therapy can be used to refer to a number of different ways of working, in that being with animals and horses is therapeutic. However, for it to be kind of therapy and psychotherapy, then we would be looking for somebody to be qualified as a therapist, as well as having done their equine facilitated psychotherapy training. There are different support approaches with horses that can be therapeutic, but we'd call them more equine facilitated learning or equine enrichment rather than equine therapy.
I mean, I think that first that's actually answers my second question. Do you need to be qualified to carry out equine therapy? And it seems to be you need to be dual qualified. You need to be a counsellor, psychotherapist. And you spoke about qualifications working therapeutically with horses. Is there a particular course for that?
So there's a number of different courses, in the same way that there's so many different schools of therapy, and none of them arguably are better than others. They're just different. So there are approaches like IGALA, where you would be working with a mental health specialist and an equine specialist. There's approaches like LEAP, which is a framework-based more activity-based model. I also train with the Herd Institute, which is existential integrative. So rather than having an activity-based framework, it's a philosophical underpinning from existential integrative Gestalt approaches. There is the Federation of Horses in Education and Therapy that have started a UK national register for people working with horses in what they call the field of human equine interactions. So that's one way that people can check that providers are appropriately qualified to be able to offer this work. Being trained to work in a room is one thing. Being trained to work in a room and integrate horses into the approach, so you're working alongside them as part of the treatment team. So the way that I tend to work, I look at providing an experience, really. Being with horses promotes different ways of thinking, being, and relating. And that can help clients to explore different ways of responding to the world. So you can really step in a phenomenological way to really understand what it's like for the client and develop an understanding of helping them understand what they are doing, how they're doing it, relating to the areas of proprioception, neuroception, and interoception. So that can help clients to develop techniques to self-regulate through co-regulation. So you can get really theoretical about what it is that we're doing when we're working alongside the horses, thinking about relational, somatic issues, interruptions to contact from a Gestalt perspective. But essentially what we're offering is relationship. It's that simple, but also that complicated as well.
Yes, and there's quite a few quite technical language in that. But I guess if we focus on the application, so first of all, who would benefit from equine therapy? Is there a certain client cohort, or is this something that someone may self-elect to have, as opposed to in the room therapy with just a therapist?
It's kind of both, and it can definitely support anyone, whether or not they like horses or not. There's something we can really learn when people don't like horses about what are their stories they're telling, what is their internal dialogue about what is happening with the horses. Ultimately, if you've got somebody who likes horses, you've got that buy-in. What we tend to say, I work a lot with a lot of children and young people who struggle to engage in mainstream therapies. So equine therapy can really help you absorb some real concrete lessons around human to human relating. So it can be a really good bridging therapy for people who aren't ready maybe for talking therapies. I also work with a lot of neurodivergent people who have found that room-based therapies maybe don't work for them. So that can be a really good alternative to explore things while we're doing something else. So the focus might not be on the conversation, it might be on something different, and that can help people talk about things that might be really difficult. I know when I've worked in adolescent psychiatric units, some of the best interaction work was done through playing pool or going for a walk. Yes. So equine approaches can work simply from that environment, that we're just doing something different, which can really distract from that discomfort, maybe talking about stuff that's really hard to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. I'll take your points up, I think, on the fact that it can be used with clients or individuals who may struggle really hard to sit face to face in front of a therapist. They're kind of diverted. The horse needs a lot of attention. I mean, I will declare I don't know a huge amount about horses, but I do know that they're very sensitive animals and that they can pick up. There's something called mirror neurons in the brain, which connect. There's some work done by, I believe, the Max Planck Institute a few years ago, where people can connect, and it's neurons in the brain that give us that sense of connectedness. And by being able to connect with the animal and I guess build a relational depth that people can feel regulated. It's almost like a co-regulation. Would that be an apt description, Danielle?
Yeah, and the co-regulation is really important. A lot of the people I work with really struggle to self-regulate, and we get EHCPs talking about them learning to self-regulate. But ultimately, before we self-regulate, we need to learn to co-regulate. And if the attachment difficulties that we've had, or some of the relational difficulties we've had with humans, haven't helped us to do that, that's the kind of thing that we might do with the horses. And building up that actual experience of that can really help people know what that might feel like and recognize it in humans that might be around them. Those mirror neurons are really interesting about we can really kind of look into what is actually happening in the relationship, what is being mirrored by either the horse or the client, or maybe some of the other animals that are around, or in the environment. So we can really go into that self-other environment that we might look at in Gestalt therapy with things all being in the field, or what might be figure and ground. So you can really you can really explain and explore what's happening using all sorts of different theoretical language, which can really help embed that in somebody's theoretical framework from their original training.
Yes. And I guess from the client's point of view, they're meeting a truly non-judgmental entity in a horse. The horse will react as you react to it. And I guess for some, for clients maybe with attachment issues or clients who've gone through very traumatic experience, I guess when I've interacted with horses, they're curious, they're respectful, they're kind of curious about you if you're curious about them, and you can kind of meet them where they are. And I find if I go for a walk and there's horses around, and just standing near a horse, very grounding, very regulated, because I have to be aware of my own processes when I'm with a horse. Am I on the right lines, Danielle?
Yeah, and there's been some work done by the HeartMath Institute and other places. We're looking at cortisol levels. So for me, if it's not beneficial for the horse, it's not beneficial for anyone. But we know that some of that mirroring, the mirror neuron stuff around breathing can really help the horse bring their kind of arousal state down, but also clients. And it's interesting we talk about horses being non-judgmental. Horses have got to judge situations constantly in order to survive as prey animals. But often as humans, we don't have the same stories that we tell ourselves about the way that animals judge compared to the way that humans judge. And I talked about neuroception and interoception earlier. We can kind of have that conversation with the client about how they judge what's safe and dangerous and what helps them understand what's going on inside their body, and when they're starting to get a bit uncomfortable. But we can explore that in relation to the horse as well. What are they seeing? What are they breaking down on a phenomenological level to really start to understand how that happens in relationship? What is going on for me? What is going on for the horse? And how might I interpret that and make sense of that and take it outside of the session?
Yes, sort of, what does this mean? You're left with asking the fundamental question. I guess the existential question is, what does this mean? What are my choices here? And I think that is ultimately the goal of therapy to some extent. It's certainly for clients who are trying to make sense of who they are and what they want to do in the world. That fundamental basis of what does this mean? Who am I? Is the starting of that question. In terms of referrals, I talked earlier about people may be self-referred, or it may be useful for a certain client cohort. Do people actually seek out equine therapy? Is this something that people would say, no, this is the direction I want to go?
We're starting to see that. I know I'm starting to see, and colleagues are starting to see in their practice, that people are seeking this out as maybe a first point of call with therapy, rather than how it maybe has been historically, where people have looked at it as nothing else has worked, I may as well try this. I've not got nothing to lose almost. Whereas people we get a lot of people self-referring who have maybe heard something about it on the news or seen something about it on the TV or talked to a friend who's maybe tried equine therapy. I know over COVID, people were experiencing a lot more time in nature and really thinking about the value of that. So often people are seeking that out as this is something that I want to do. I don't want to sit in a room. There is actually an alternative to sitting in a room, having to look at somebody and talk to them. There might be alternatives other than kind of the more commonly known therapies such as drama therapy or art therapy or other creative therapies. We're also getting referrals more through social care and the NHS. With the NHS, it's challenging in that the quantitative evidence-based is more limited with equine approaches, but the qualitative base is growing all the time. So there are people who are really demonstrating how this work can be clinically effective, which I think might really help people to see it as an alternative that really can work for people. It's not just hanging out with horses, even though that is just what it is. It can really, really benefit people in concrete ways.
Indeed. So it sounds to me like the evidence base is mixed. The figurative, the numbers, which is of course is quantitative, is not quite there yet. But the qualitative, indeed, asking about clients' experiences and their lived experience seems to be very, very strong. I'm interested in how the therapy is conducted. So, in terms of the therapy, would the therapist and the client and the horse meet? Where would they meet? Would they meet in a paddock, or how is the structure of it? I'm kind of fascinated about that.
So it depends on the model that somebody works in. So when I meet people, I offer them a free 30-minute consultation where they can come out, suss me out, see the site, and see how they feel. Because I think from that embodied perspective, it's really important that people feel comfortable in that space. And then there's that consideration of, if not me, who else might be able to help you with this approach. But generally, for me, sessions are really client-led, and the whole program is around assessment and allowing the client to explore the site and familiarize themselves with the animals and the therapist at their pace. So the client's needs will be responded to and met in the moment around their capacity for regulation and window of tolerance or circle of capacity. So for me, sessions on activity or task-led, we might do some tasks around equine care as a means of learning about each other. And that can help people attune to their sensory needs as well as the needs of the horses. So it very much depends. For me, I have a barn, I have a paddock, and clients might meet the horse over a fence, and we might just do some observation and what we call herd reflection, where we're just watching and seeing what is happening and how might we make sense of that. And then for me, I'll work with the horses what we call at liberty. So that means that they're not restrained in any way. They don't have a head collar on or anything to tie them up. They have choice, and the client has choice about whether they want to engage and to what level they want to engage, as well as when they want to leave. And I think that's really, really important because, again, as I said before, if it's not helpful for the horse, it's not helpful for anyone. And what are we modelling if we're showing that this is okay for a horse? That might really trigger some of the clients' experiences around trauma.
Yes.
So we really want to set up a really ethical environment for everyone.
It's demonstrating respect for the horse and the horse's needs, and within that, the client can then see that respect is a fundamental part of existence for things that live, and they can see that for them, because some clients may not have had any respect, or their boundaries may have not been respected, but by modelling that with the horse, they can see that. I think it's an absolutely fascinating area of therapy. It's a growing area of therapy, I have to say, and one I think which it will grow even further. It's been a pleasure interviewing you. So I will say finally, Dr. Danielle Mills, thank you for joining us.
Big thank you to Dr. Mills. A big thank you to you, Rory, for hosting that interview on equine therapy. Really interesting that there are so many different elements to therapy, and how it's not just all about talking. We can add other elements to that are so very, very powerful indeed. Well, this has been the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 241. I don't know.
Absolutely.
241. It's so many episodes, I can't even say it, Rory.
Yes, 241, and we started off with a theory and practice, applying ethics, the beating heart of our work and our profession. We moved on to practice partner, and we were very, very fortunate to catch up with Darren McLaughlin from Web Healer, who's given us some absolute expert advice on website and website development. And then finally, we're doubly blessed because I met up with Dr. Danielle Mills, and she spoke about equine therapy, how to work with horses. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD library, visit counsellingtutor.com.